Se me había olvidado desconectar el teléfono. Buenos días. Bien, en primer lugar, algunas reflexiones sobre Castilla-La Mancha y el mercado británico. El mercado anglosajón en general, pero Inglaterra en particular y Escocia, son probablemente los mercados más antiguos y, por tanto, más sabios en materia de vino. Basta recordar que a partir del siglo XII, Inglaterra, que tenía una reina bordelesa, Leonor de Aquitania, ya importaba los vinos de Burdeos. Hizo famosa esa región, como posteriormente lo haría con muchas regiones europeas, incluyendo Jerez a partir del siglo XV y XVI, Borgoña y, en tiempos más modernos, Rioja y las restantes regiones españolas. España fue, aparte de Jerez, que se convirtió en una región mundialmente conocida ya en el siglo XVI-XVII y especialmente en la época de gran incremento del comercio del vino en el siglo XVIII, el resto de las regiones españolas eran relativamente desconocidas en Inglaterra y en el mundo. Y fue solamente a partir de de los años 70 cuando Rioja, especialmente, aunque también Cava, inician, una presencia, significativa en Inglaterra. España ha cometido algunos errores en el mercado internacional del vino que le siguen pasando factura. Lo que hizo para penetrar en un mercado como el inglés es entrar fundamentalmente por precio en los supermercados ingleses. Y otros países lo habían hecho al contrario. Es decir, el modelo, evidentemente, es Francia, donde una región como Burdeos, que acabo de mencionar, pues ya sus Grand Crus, que se exportaban en aquella época en barricas, se vendían hasta 10 o más veces lo que un vino genérico de Burdeos. Esa imagen de que una región como Burdeos, que produce 600 millones de botellas, los premios Crus representan apenas 1 millón de botellas, pero, generan una enorme goodwill, como se dice en marketing en Inglaterra, o marca para su región, ha sido enormemente exitoso. El resultado, y de la asignatura que yo creo que tenemos que discutir en este Congreso, es que el vino español, si el litro medio de vino español vale en torno a 1 euro, el italiano vale 2 euros y el francés 5, con volúmenes superiores. Es decir, tenemos que hacer la batalla del valor añadido y eliminar en el plazo más corto posible, en el mercado inglés como en los demás, la venta de graneles, que es una práctica muy poco rentable para un país que se quiere del primer mundo. La única fórmula para hacer eso es la que acabo de decir: tener vinos de prestigio que generen marca, que salgan en los medios de comunicación importantes y que generen la impresión al consumidor de que tenemos una región con muy alta calidad. Y Castilla-La Mancha tiene ese potencial, como lo demuestran sus pagos. Yo soy presidente de una asociación que se llama Grandes Pagos de España, que hace regularmente catas en todos los mercados importantes. Atkin ha sido muchas veces participante en esas catas, tanto en Vinexpo como en Inglaterra o en otros países, y lo que se logra muy rápidamente con presentaciones bien hechas es cambiar la imagen de que España necesariamente es igual a vino barato. No obstante, y volviendo al mercado inglés, es un mercado que ha evolucionado desde mi punto de vista negativamente. en el sentido de que era el mercado, sin duda, con mayor número de expertos y de escritores, y Tim Atkin es un buen ejemplo, y de críticos que conocían perfectamente los vinos del mundo y dominaban la crítica y la prensa y los libros. Sin embargo, el creciente peso de los supermercados en la venta de vino en Inglaterra, que ya ocupan prácticamente más del 95% de la venta, ha hecho que las firmas importadoras, muchas veces empezaban por especializarse en vinos de alta calidad, poco a poco hayan ido, por necesidades del negocio, acrecentando su cartera con vinos de bajo precio que entran en esa batalla siempre a la baja de cantidades cantidades cada vez mayores, pero cada vez a precios más competitivos. Pasaré a la presentación, que era mi cometido inicial aquí, de Tim Atkin. Bueno, yo diría que cuando se lee el currículum de Tim se comprende rápidamente que no necesita presentación. Es una persona que basta con decir Tim Atkin para que todo el mundo que esté algo informado en el mundo del vino sepa exactamente quién es. Pero vamos, algunos datos que da él mismo, que además pone en su página web una foto muy divertida para quitarse importancia, donde un chorro de vino le impacta en la frente y acaba riéndose. Es verdaderamente impresionante lo que pone al principio. Es Master of Wine, que es desde hace 28 años, es la, digamos, institución en el mundo profesional de cata más respetada del mundo. Escribe para medios o participa en medios líderes como The World of Fine Wine, Intelligent Life, Gourmet Traveler Wine, Imbibe, Decanter, que es una de las revistas pioneras inglesas en vinos de calidad, Woman and Home. Participa en el programa de audiencia masiva Traveler Wine, Gourmet Traveler Wine, Saturday Kitchen en la BBC, y es uno de los célebres Three Wine Men, uno de sus compañeros en ese trío, Osclar, que es un buen amigo, porque además me escribió la primera crítica favorable a ella por los inicios de los años 80. Bueno, como dice él mismo, después pone un currículum mucho más largo que es para buscar empleo. Yo creo que Tim, como Modesto, no necesita buscar empleo. Tiene un pluriempleo asegurado con las revistas y medios más importantes del mundo. Ha recibido premios impresionantes, como el primer premio de Vin de France, los vinos de Francia. Su website fue nombrado el mejor website o website del año en 2011 por los premios Louis Roederer, y en 2012 fue nombrado una de las 10 personas que más impacto positivo y perenne ha hecho sobre el negocio o la industria del vino. Ha sido juez de vinos en todas partes, en Inglaterra, en Francia, en Italia, en Estados Unidos, Argentina, España, Sudáfrica, Chile, Australia, y es copresidente de lo que es probablemente la cata más respetada internacionalmente en el mundo del vino, y hay muchas catas en el mundo, que es el International Wine Challenge. Así es que yo creo que con esto, si no, estaríamos mucho más rato consumiendo tiempo que prefiero reservar a Tim Atkin, hablando de sus restantes éxitos y de su currículum, y le cedo la palabra muy gustoso. Es además un buen amigo, y he tenido la suerte de tenerle en dominio de Valdepusa, pasando un par de días donde aprendimos todos muchísimo. Gracias, Tim, por tu presencia.
Gracias, Carlos, y gracias a ustedes por invitarme a esta ciudad tan histórica, tan espléndida, para compartir algunas ideas sobre el mercado inglés. Lo siento muchísimo, pero intento hablar en el idioma de Shakespeare y no en el idioma de Cervantes. Y me gustaría empezar con un chiste. So I'm going to start with a joke. The worst thing you can do with a joke is tell people you're going to tell them a joke. Because if they don't find the joke funny, then it's not very good. But I'm going to tell this joke, and I hope that the joke works in Spanish, too, through an interpreter. The joke is as follows. There's an old man sitting on a park bench, crying, tears coming down his face. And there's a guy runs past, a jogger, a runner, and he sees this old man crying, and he says to the old man, "Are you okay?" And the old man says, "Life is terrible." And the jogger says, "Why is life terrible?" And the old man says, "I've just got married." And the jogger says, "Well, you should be happy." And the old man says, "Happy? I'm ecstatic. This is absolutely amazing. He said, "My marriage is incredible." He said, "My wife is 21 years old." And he said, "God, that's amazing." He said, "How old are you?" And he said, "I'm 82, this old man." He said, "Well, that's amazing." And the old man says, "It's even better than that. She's intelligent. She's got a doctorate. Her father owns a winery in Bordeaux. She's really, really smart." And he said, "And thanks to Viagra, we make love 8 times a day." This guy said, "This is incredible." So the jogger says to the old man, "So why are you crying?" And the old man says, "I can't remember where I live." Remembering where you live, your terroir, your terruño, if you want to call it, is very important in life. And it's very important, particularly if you're exporting to certain markets. And I'm going to try and give you some information today about the UK market, which will help you to understand, if you like, the place where I live. There's a famous story about China, a group of Chinese importers who were visiting Portugal, and they went to see a company called the Symington Group. And the Symingtons welcomed these Chinese importers. And the Symington colour, the colour of their branding, is green. Okay? So the Symingtons took these Chinese importers for lunch on the Douro River, and it was a hot day. So they gave them green hats to wear. Okay? And all of these Chinese importers were saying, no, thank you, don't want the hat. And the Symington said, no, look, it's hot, it's sunny, you're going to get sunburn. And it turns out that the colour green in China means that somebody else is sleeping with your wife. So be aware of culture, really, what it is that makes England different. Now, it was very interesting listening to the speeches this morning. Some of the things, particularly about the German market, are very similar to the English market. But some things are very different, too. England has very little in common, I would say, with the Chinese market, at least for now, and some things also in common with the American market. Now, how many of you in this room are wine producers? Hands up. No one. A few wine producers? Yeah, okay. How many of you export to the UK? A few? Okay. I mean, some of you may find that your view of the UK market is something a bit like this, really. You sort of think, oh my God, it's just awful. The UK market is impossible to deal with. It's not great. I'm going to try and present a slightly more positive image of the UK market. And as the others have done, I'd like to begin with a general description of the economy. It's very important to know about the economy. You can see that inflation in the UK is about 2.7%, so steady. GDP slowly growing, our gross domestic product. But austerity measures, the sort of things that you will be familiar with in Spain, the crisis, the economic crisis, is still continuing. Wine inflation, interestingly, is above overall inflation. So wine prices are increasing faster than overall inflation. The pound, and I wish we were part of the euro, but we're not, the pound it has mixed fortunes. It's done well against the South African rand and against the euro, but it's done badly against the dollar. And certain countries only export wines to England in dollar prices. So Chile, Argentina, and obviously the United States. Wages, the amount of money that people earn, just going up very slightly, but the cost of buying things in England is even higher. It's 3.3%. So there's a difference between how much people earn and how much they can spend. And that means that people have less money. Their budgets are reduced, are squeezed. This means that more people, obviously, are drinking at home. 63% drink wine at home. It's cheaper to drink wine in your own house than it is to drink wine in a restaurant. We all know that. Overall, England is what we would call, I think, a mature market. Wine has been in decline. Wine consumption has been in decline since 2007, after about 2 decades of very rapid growth. Okay? Part of the reason for this is high taxation. If you think things are bad in Spain, taxation in England is about €3 a bottle, just taxation. And it was interesting hearing what the average price of a bottle was in a discount store in Germany was actually less, €2.60, than taxation in England. Okay, so it's annoying. Do we drink wine? Yes, we do. But beer, particularly lager, is the most important drink. It's the drink that people drink most of in England. This is adults who drink. Followed by red wine, followed by white wine. The worrying thing in England, and I think the same is true in producing countries like Spain and Italy and France, is that fewer young people are drinking wine. They tend to drink something called RTDs, and RTDs means ready to drink. These are packaged beverages. They're often alcoholic, yeah? They're easy to drink, and they're often sweet. And so RTDs are more popular amongst young people, as is cider, yeah? Or cider is about the same as wine. But beer and RTDs, as you can see, are more popular than wine, and only 26% of wine drinkers in the UK are under 30 years old. So our market is mature in 2 senses. People are getting older, but also it's mature in that the wine market isn't growing. Okay? It's a real challenge not only for you, but also for us. We import about 125 million 9-litre cases of wine. And this makes us, as we've heard already today, the 6th biggest importer in the world, after the States, Italy, France, Germany, and now China, that very dynamic market we've heard about. We're in slight decline overall. The off-trade, that's to say supermarkets and places where you buy wine and take it away, is slightly declining. The on-trade, restaurants, bars, is growing. But the on-trade, is much smaller than the off-trade. Sparkling wine is growing significantly. It's up 10%. And even though champagne is down, sparkling wine as a whole is going up. And the good news is that 35% of the sparkling wine market is Spanish, is Cava. What are the main exporters to the UK? Well, you can see this here. It's fairly obvious. It's a very different picture from the other markets we've discussed today. Australia, partly for reasons it was a former colony and they speak the same language as we do, and we like the styles of wine they make, is very important in England still. Italy, most of Italy is growth based on 2 products, Prosecco and Pinot Grigio. I try very hard to put people off Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio, somebody once described it as Pinot Grigio, or San Pellegrino, as it's called in Italy. And I have invented a special glass for Pinot Grigio, which has a hole in the bottom of it, so you can just pour the wine straight through the glass onto the floor. But it's having no impact whatsoever on Pinot Grigio sales. After that comes France, a typical UK market, and then the USA. The USA, a lot of the market from the USA tends to be sweet and pink. Then Spain, hooray, finally, 11%. Spain's going up. Chile, 9%, South Africa, New Zealand, Germany. The 2 countries that are growing fastest are Spain, which is good news, and South Africa. Now, to a certain extent, this is related to the prices that those two countries can offer. Spain, as we shall see in a minute, its average price is comparatively cheap in the UK. The average price of a bottle of wine in the UK is £5.11, of which £2.49 is duty and VAT. Okay, so nearly half of the bottle is given to the government, to the Treasury. And this is a cheap wine market, just like Germany. Only 16% of the market is over £7. Okay? It's pretty small, really. But there is a shift towards people spending more money. Remember, people are drinking more wine at home, and that means that they're more likely to spend a little bit more on the wine they drink at home than the wine they have in a restaurant, because £10 at home is much better than £10 in a restaurant. Just to talk about the number of adults, there are 29 million regular wine drinkers out of an adult population of about 49 million. That's to say that they drink wine at least once a month. And as we've already seen, our per capita consumption is 13th in the world. We're 23 litres per annum. This again going down. There are more women than men drinking wine in England, about 53%. This is, in other words, a cosmopolitan market, obviously. It's an import market. Only 1% of what we drink is English wine. Okay? It's a very, very small amount of the market. But it's also quite conservative. And a lot of the most popular wines are brands, what we call big brands. So things like Blossom Hill, Jacob's Creek, Echo Falls, Hardy's. Probably the most famous Spanish brand would be Torres, or maybe Campo Viejo, those two brands, really. Very few people collect wine. Very few people buy wine to keep. Yeah? 75% of people have fewer or less than 12 bottles in their cellar. So it's an immediate market where people are drinking the wine quite quickly. Is it okay for speed? You guys up there? Yes? Okay, good, right. This is in essence the UK paradox. I'm not going to read this quotation out, but I think that it is an interesting dichotomy, if you like. On the one hand, this is a market which leads many areas of the fine wine world, particularly Bordeaux and Burgundy and Port, where a lot of producers, top producers, especially from Spain and Italy and old Europe, want to sell their wines. But the dichotomy is that at the other end, it's dominated by cheap prices, by supermarkets, and by very, very tough competition on price. Okay. What's Spain's position in this market? Well, Spain's average price point is £4.69. Remember, the average overall price point was £5.11. Just to look at some of those other average price points, most countries, of the leading countries, have a higher average price than Spain. You are at the same price as Italy and South Africa, but all those other people, Australia, USA, Argentina, France, New Zealand, are above you. To a certain degree, that is a function of exchange rates, in that most of those countries, France is an exception, but Argentina, USA, Australia, Chile, New Zealand, all have much stronger currencies than the pound. And therefore, part of the reason why Italy and Spain and France, or Italy and Spain are not doing quite so well, is the comparative weakness of the euro. Spain, as I've already said, is one of the few countries showing growth. It's up 13% in the off-trade, the take-home trade, and only South Africa and Argentina have done better. And 2% in the on-trade. You can see, again, the only other countries that are showing growth are those countries. So it is quite a positive picture for Spain, so don't be depressed. Spain has been growing every year since 2008, and the average growth of Spanish wine is about 9%, so that's good news. Here you can see these off-trade volumes by country, and you can see Spain there, where are we, is 873,000 hectolitres. And now I got these figures from AC Nielsen, and they're pretty up to date. They're the 12 months to the end of August of this year. So they're very recent figures, and you can see where Spain is. Spain is definitely growing. That's in the off-trade. And this is the split in England between red, white, and rosé. You can see that red and white are pretty similar, but rosé is growing. Rosé is now at about 12%. Along with sparkling wine, it's one of the two growth areas in England. So those of you who are rosé producers, send more to England. The market is both sweet and dry, not at the same time. Spanish rosé, I'm sure you would agree, is better suited to dry styles than to sweet styles. But I think that there's a real gap in the market there. This is on-trade volumes, again, by country. They're much smaller. We've talked about this, and Spain's share here would be about 101,000 hectolitres, which is about sort of an eighth of its overall presence in the off-trade. So for every 8.5 bottles that people are taking home, they're drinking one in a restaurant of Spanish wine. And you can see that Spain is doing slightly less well in the restaurant sector than it is in the supermarket sector. Again, very similar figures. This is the UK market for the on-trade. Again, it's almost identical. I have to now, I'm afraid, talk about supermarkets. Supermarkets in England are very, very important, much more important, I think, than I believe than they are in America, although we've already heard about discounters in Germany. The supermarkets dominate the market in England. They really do. About 85% of the off-trade goes through the supermarkets, and there are 4 big names that I'm sure you all know. Tesco, which is the biggest by far. Something like 35% of all wine in the UK is sold through Tesco. Then you have Sainsbury's, Asda, Morrison's, and then some smaller supermarkets and discounters. M&S, Marks & Spencer, Waitrose, the Co-op are supermarkets, and Aldi and Lidl are discounters. All of these people also have an online presence. That means they sell wine not just from their stores, but also from their websites. Volume, as we've seen, is flat. The under £4 sector is collapsing. Okay? And the reason for that is taxation, as much as anything, and also currency fluctuations, but also wine inflation. It's getting more expensive to ship wine from other markets into the UK. It's almost impossible to do these sub-£4 wines. For all that, the UK market is still obsessed with discounting and with promotions. Everything you see in a supermarket on what we call the gondola ends, that's to say the part at the end of an aisle where you turn your trolley, is on a discount. And as Carlos said, I do a television show in England, and we film in supermarkets. And it's very interesting to watch consumers as they come in, because they all go straight for what is cheapest. And a friend of mine who's Argentinian said that, I said to him, how would you describe the English market? And he said, es un mercado que exige mucho, pero paga poco. And I think that's the thing you need to, if you have to remember one thing about this market, it's very competitive, but it doesn't pay a lot of money. The good thing is that people are spending more. It's going up. So doubled in the last 3 years, people who will spend more than £7. What's the rest of the trade? Well, very quickly, the on-trade we've discussed. It's restaurants, pubs, famous English pubs and bars. And this is about 20% of the market. So the split is 80% off-trade and 20% on-trade. People in restaurants are generally more conservative. Right? It means they're less likely to order something interesting. But there are some places, particularly those with sommeliers, where they can be a bit more adventurous, where people will say to you, try this, Albarino from Spain, try this Assyrtiko from Greece, and people will listen. There is a small trend in England for sherry bars, for natural wine bars and organic wine bars, but to a degree this is London-based. Okay, this is London-centric. That London, it's not like, I think Spain is different from England in that Spain has a number of big cities, but particularly Barcelona and Madrid are rival cities in some ways. London has nothing whatsoever to match it within the UK. It's very much the place that leads the trends in the UK. The high street off-licences are in decline. Some of you will remember Oddbins, it's still going. Wine Rack, they still exist. But another place where there are opportunities is that as these places have gone down, have closed, Some smaller operations have replaced them, and things like the Sampler or Cambridge Wine Merchants are very good examples of that. And I think that they are good opportunities for you. Mail order sales, we've talked about this. There's one very big company called Direct Wines, and they own Laithwaite's, Virgin, Sunny Times Wine Club, and Avery's. And there are two other big players, Wine Society and Naked Wines. The good thing about mail order is that because people are ordering the wine at home, they tend to buy 6 bottles or sometimes 12 bottles, yeah? And they're more likely to spend more money, and they're more likely to take a risk. So mail order is a good place to be, I would say. What are the trends? Well, excuse me, a glass of water. Thank you. There's a shift to red and rosé and sparkling wines. There's a little shift towards organic wines and natural wines. There is a little bit of a shift. I think we're ahead of America in this respect, away from the 3 big varieties. That's Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and Pinot Grigio, although Pinot Grigio is still far too popular. The other significant white varieties, well, I've listed them there for you. I think you could add Albarino to that, and possibly Gruner Veltliner as well from Austria. We're seeing the same thing in red wines, a shift away from the big 4, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, and Pinot Noir, and this sense that people are more interested in new things. Zinfandel, Tempranillo, good for Spain, Grenache or Garnacha, Malbec, Pinotage, and so on. I asked Wine Intelligence, I think Richard Holstead was here yesterday. They've just published some research where they asked people to tell them, a little bit like the questions that John asked in the States, what makes you buy? If you're a consumer, what are the things that you buy? And this is the order in which they responded. This is the order of importance. So the first thing was grape variety. It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of old world wines, a lot of Spanish wines, but particularly a lot of French and Italian wines, don't tell you the grape variety. It's not on the label. It's sometimes on the back label. In some regions, it's actually illegal to put the name of the grape variety on the wine. And yet, if you're selling to the UK market, people think that's very important. Promotional offer. They want money off. A brand I know. So something I've had before. Remember I said it's a conservative market. Country of origin. People feel good about certain countries, and they feel good about Spain. English people like Spain. We'll talk about that more in a minute. A recommendation by a friend or family member. Then the region of origin. Now, the interesting thing is we've got down the first page, and nobody has mentioned journalists. It's a bit depressing if you're a journalist. Nobody cares what we think. Alcohol content. And people don't want more alcohol. They want less. That's, again, a bit of a trend. And I think we're ahead of America in that respect. I think America, partly because of the influence of critics, of wine journalists, still thinks that more alcoholic means better. And if you look at what's happened in Ribera, which is one of my favorite wine regions in Spain, over the last 20 years, a lot of the wines have become very alcoholic because I think they've been chasing these American critics. People like a label, fine. Recommendation by the staff. Finally, recommendation by a critic. So we do have a little bit of importance. Recommendation by a wine guide, a book or a website, a medal or award, and then I think sweetness. I went to a tasting yesterday by Tesco before I got on the plane to come here, and Tesco showed about 140 wines. And the level of sweetness, particularly in the red wines, was more perceptible than I've ever seen before. They're obviously listening to consumers who are saying we want sweeter red wines. Okay? There was one wine, a dry red wine from California, which had 16 grams of sugar in it. So that's a medium sweet wine. It's really very horrible. I can tell you the name later if you want to know. Right. Okay. So that's no point for it. The favourite regions. What are the famous regions? And these are unprompted. In other words, they don't say, do you like Bordeaux, do you like Rioja? They say, tell us which are your favourite wine regions in the world. And this is in order of recognition. This is the same research from Wine Intelligence. And you can see that Bordeaux is number 1, and then you can see the further list. The good news is Rioja is number 2. Good news for Spain, possibly bad news for Castilla-La Mancha, because you've got a very strong competitor. Rioja is the only Spanish region in the top 10 that has an unprompted name recall. The Spanish market in the UK is dominated by Rioja. Nearly 30% of what Spain exports to the UK, and these figures are from wines from Spain, so Icex, and again, they're to the end of last year. Rioja is still very, very popular with English consumers. It's up 14% in the last official shipments. The only other two really big Spanish regions in volume terms are Cava and Sherry, or Jerez. Yeah? And the last two, Cava and Jerez, are slightly down. Okay? There you can see the share of the major Spanish wine regions. Now, the list that I was given by Icex, by Wines of Spain, has 90 Spanish wine regions, 90, yeah? 90 regions and pagos listed. And these, by far, are the most important in terms of volume, yeah? So you look at the chunk. If you take Rioja and Cava and Jerez, so the gold, the green, and the blue parts of the circle, you can see how little is left for the rest of Spain, for 87 DOCs, yeah? What's good about Spanish wine in the UK? You have a very strong generic body, wines from Spain. Despite the crisis, they've been very good, and I'm involved with a competition called the Wines of Spain Awards, and they've continued to do that, which is great. What are the most popular styles? I've said, is that too strong? In a way, is Rioja almost too strong for its own good in the UK or for the good of Spain? There is little knowledge or recognition of Spanish grape varieties beyond, I would say, Tempranillo, Garnacha, Albarino. Those three grape varieties. I think if you ask people, what is the grape variety of Jerez? Nobody would know. They wouldn't know. Yeah? Obviously, there's recognition of international grapes, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot, that I know you grow a lot in La Mancha. But in terms of Spanish grapes, not that much recognition. There's a good presence in the off-trade, the on-trade, and not only in Spanish and Spanish-themed restaurants. The fine wine market generally is very small in England. The fine wine market that exists is, I'm sorry to say, dominated by France. If most English people are going to spend a lot of money on wine, they will buy Bordeaux or Burgundy or Champagne or something from the Rhone. Yeah? Maybe a little bit from Italy and a little bit from Spain. But that's changing. I went last week to a tasting that Berry Brothers and Rudd, they're the oldest wine merchant in England, they held of Spanish wines, just Spanish wines, in a massive room in London, in Victoria. And it was full of people. And they said to me that it was their single most successful event in terms of the number of people buying wine. So Spanish wine in the mid-market and in the upper market is starting to gain increasing importance. We all know that Spain is very diverse, 90 regions, and that my list of 90 regions begins with Abona and ends with Yecla, not the two best regions in Spain necessarily, but they're the A to Y, if you like, of Spanish wine. Most people are unaware of these regions. These regions, I think there is a big job to do in promoting the enormous diversity of what Spain has to offer. What else is good about Spain? Well, Spanish food is pretty amazing. If you look at the list of the... Sorry, where are we? There we go. If you look at the list of the top 100 restaurants in the world, 3 in the top 10, including the best restaurant in the world, supposedly, I've never been, but I'd like to go, El Celler de Can Roca in Girona, are in the top 10. How many from France? None. Okay? So Spanish gastronomy is recognized, I think, as leading the world. It really is. It's overtaken France. Maybe it's on a par with Italy. Spanish wines work well with food. You're very lucky to live in a gastronomic culture where people drink wine with food. In England, very often, they don't drink wine with food. They regard wine as a reason to get drunk. Really? They don't think of wine as being part of a meal. And I think the tapas sherry bar revolution in the UK, which we've obviously imported from Spain, and I understand the tapas are fantastic in Toledo, and I'm looking forward to trying those this evening, is very important, I think, for promoting Spanish wine. Spain's list of indigenous grape varieties, let's be honest, is not as interesting, I would say, as Italy's or as Portugal's. Italy has something like 600 grapes. Portugal's got about 300. I don't know the number in Spain, but I think that Spain has enough grape varieties, and I think it could also be developing more. It's very interesting what is happening in Rioja at the moment with the rediscovery of Maturana and Navarrete, and I think that all these other grape varieties that Juan Carlos Sancha from the Logroño University is developing, I think are very important for Spain. I think that a lot of these old varieties have disappeared, and Spain has tended to focus very much on two red grapes, Tempranillo and Garnacha. And Garnacha is being pulled out in favor of Tempranillo. Spain is regarded as value for money. Even at the top end, I think the very best wines in Spain are much better value than the best wines in France and Italy. You can drink amazing wine from Jerez, you can drink amazing wine from Rioja, from Ribera, from lots of regions at a comparatively inexpensive price, and I think consumers realize that. I think the improvements in other regions, so if you think in the classic regions of Spain would be the ones that we've mentioned, so to probably Ribera and Rioja, maybe a bit of Navarra, and certainly Jerez. People are starting to accept the fact that other regions, particularly Castilla-La Mancha, can make exciting new things. I've been coming here probably for 20 years, and partly in the old days to see Carlos, because Carlos was the beacon for this region. He really was somebody who invested his own money and expertise and time and passion in this region. And the transformation of this region, I think, has been remarkable. Rioja is still very strong. It's very dynamic. You're not going to change that, okay? As I've said, Spain still dominates sparkling wine sales, and I think there's an opportunity there. And sherry is still popular. Spain has 54% of the fortified wine market. It's much bigger than Portugal with 41%. So beyond those two countries, Spain and Portugal, there's very little in the fortified wine market. Right, the important bit now. How do you develop this market? You as producers of Castilla-La Mancha wines. I think you need the supermarkets, right? We've talked about 75-80% of the market being really bought by about 5 or 6 major companies, 4 really, You have to sell wine if you have volumes of wine, and you need to sell volumes of wine if you're working for a cooperative, for example. You've got to sell to those guys. But don't sell too cheaply. John said this as well, I think, or was it, I can't remember who else mentioned it. 2012 and 2013 have both been difficult and quite small vintages in Europe. There's not a lot of wine. For once, supply is probably going to be, demand is going to be greater than supply. So don't sell your wine too cheaply. Establish I think a market for more interesting, offbeat wines. Victor was talking about Bobal. You guys talking about what you can do with maybe with Petit Verdot and other varieties. What you can do with Tempranillo, what you can do with Cabernet, all these things. I think just get a name for diversity and establish those through the on-trade, through restaurants, through bars, through by-the-glass programs, and through independent wine merchants. Now, I've already argued against myself and said that journalists aren't very important, wine journalists. But I think it is important to invite people like me and sommeliers to the regions. We are, in a way, if we like what you do, we will write about it, and we are therefore your unofficial ambassadors in that sense. My last point on this slide is quality. The quality in this region has not always been great, let's be honest. It's a big region. The better you can make your quality, and I'm aware that people are asking you to produce quality without necessarily paying for it, the better your image will be. Don't export your worst wines, or don't export them to England. Really don't, because I don't think in the end it helps you as a market. Some of you may ship your wines in bulk. Victor de la Serna, my good friend, was talking about granel, about bulk sales. You have to sell in bulk. This is a big region. But I think the more of your best wines you can bottle in the region with strict quality control, the better. Cooperatives. This is a cooperative region. This is a cooperative country in that sense. And I know that historically people were often paid on on alcohol content or weight sometimes. I think paying people by quality rather than by yield is a really positive thing. And the best cooperatives, not only in Spain, but also in Italy and in France, now have moved beyond the old cooperative mentality, which is that we take anything. Bring us any grapes, we'll take anything. You don't need to do that. How many of you, I wonder, in this room have a website? The average quality of wine websites is, not mine, obviously, which is brilliant, not really, is terrible. I think winery websites, not just in Spain, but around the world, are bad. Look at people who have good websites. Make sure you have a button you can click so you can get an English translation, a Chinese translation, a German translation. But just make sure that you sell your wines from the page. It's free advertising. Not completely free, but it's cheap. Use social media. I don't know how many of you are on Twitter or Facebook. Again, it's a way of creating a community for your wines. It's a way of interesting people in your wines, and it costs nothing. Put the wines in front of consumers. I personally, if I were you, would not advertise. I don't think advertising in wine magazines is a useful way to spend your money. Pour, pour, pour. Yeah? The more times you can pour your wine into a glass, somebody can taste it, the more chance that somebody is going to say, hey, I like that. That's great. I'm going to buy another bottle. I don't know if there's a regional competition here between you guys. Sometimes I know that the competitions in Spain, within Spain, are slightly frowned upon. The people don't like them because they think they should promote the entire region rather than the best of a region. My feeling, as a Brit, as an Englishman, is that you should always promote the best. If you promote the best, it makes the worst get better. Promote the best, and it encourages other people to do better. If you just promote average, you're never going to get any better. So promote the best. Work together. I mean, that sounds like a cliche. It sounds like a platitude, something that's very easy to say. But it's much harder to achieve rather than just in principle, but in actuality, to actually do it. Work together. Work to sell your wines overseas together. Work to travel overseas together, to fund joint operations. Present an image of your region. Now, I know Castilla-La Mancha is a very big region with lots of sub-regions within it, but promote those regions. Okay, I've been told to time out. Can I have my screen back? Hello? Oh, okay. Yes? Hello? Can I come back? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. Conclusions, you see, I've stuck to time. Okay, this is a very competitive market, UK market. It's got a small domestic industry. I've said 3%. It's somewhere between 1% and 3%, depending on how much wine we produce in England in any one vintage. This year has been a very good vintage in England. Last year was one of the worst vintages ever in England. Germany, as we've already learned, has a much bigger percentage of domestic sales, of domestic wine. The recession in England is claiming some companies have gone out of business. It will take more people out of business. So be very aware of who you are selling your wine to and make sure that you have good references before you go into business with them. It's dominated, as I've already said, by a handful of major supermarkets. I'm sorry, but it's a fact of life. It is a low-price, high-taxation market. £2.49 duty and VAT. Therefore, low profitability. The three Nordic countries, so the Scandinavian countries, have all got higher income and a greater per capita GDP than the UK and Germany. There are other markets in the world, two of which we've heard about today, that are big potential markets for you guys, China and the USA. Those others would be Canada, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Brazil, Mexico. All of these places are things you should consider. I'm not saying you should only sell wine to the UK, but the UK is still, for all those reasons, a good thing. There is a window of opportunity through the independents, through the on-trade. Remember we talked that Spanish wine was much smaller in the on-trade than in the off-trade, and through mail-order companies. But the most important thing of all is make better wine. Right? If you make better wine, the market will always find you. It may take a while to find you, but in the end, all of us, everybody, wants to drink better wine. Thank you very much for inviting me to come to this wonderful city today. And I hope you've understood most of what I've said, and forgive me for speaking in English. Thank you.